All right. Really excited to bring in our next guest. Chang, hello.
Hey Becca, how you doing?
Great to see you. So for those of you who don't know, this is Chang. He's the co-founder of LanceDB. Also, full disclosure, one of our amazing portfolio companies. And I'm super excited for your talk today. So I'm just gonna get out of the way and give you the floor.
Thank you, Becca. I'm excited to be here. Cool. So, I'm not sure. I tried StreamYard for projecting slides, so if it doesn't work, bear with me.
I'll jump back in here for a sec. There you go. Okay. Let me add this for you. Oh, hold on one sec. There you go.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. Thanks for listening. And my name is Chang. I'm the CEO and co-founder of LanceDB. I've been building data tools for machine learning and data science for about 20 years, starting with Pandas. I was one of the first co-authors of that library. Spent a bunch of years at Cloudera working on open source Hadoop technologies. And now I'm creating LanceDB, another open source company to store and process all of that data that doesn't fit neatly into those Pandas data frames. So I wanted to talk to you about open source startups, and because it's, open source is a passion of mine, and I seem to be a glutton for punishment and are always drawn to startups. But I would say my story starts a long time ago. I started out my career as a financial quant in 2006, and I knew I loved coding. I loved working with data, but back then data science wasn't a job title, and so then being on the East Coast, I was naturally drawn to quant finance at the time, and so you can say I was one of the kind of those earlier data science generation. But little did I know that, especially when you're first starting out, 80% of your time is actually spent on preparing the data as opposed to doing all the cool modeling work that you're expecting to do. And especially with my first years in quant finance, I did a lot of data loading. And so in quant finance, at least back in the day, the typical process was really painful. So you had a data vendor would either daily, weekly, or monthly upload some file, probably to like an FTP server. And then you had to write a process, oftentimes manually, to do the ETL. And ETL back in the day was triggered using Java, right? And imagine writing Java as your scripting language. And then you're going to use Java to load the data, probably into something like Microsoft SQL Server, right? This is finance. And then you're going to use Java to get some of that data out, maybe use Java to run some SQL queries, and then create an Excel report. Imagine manipulating Excel cells, report cells using Java code. And then instead of doing it all in Java, you probably have some embedded VB script that's probably too small for you to read, but for those of you who are old enough to remember, that is a VB script window. And of course, we had our own version of responsive UIs back then, right? So every junior analyst had to carry around a BlackBerry, and the MDs had BlackBerries, and all of your data reports had to go out in a form that's easily readable on a BlackBerry screen, or you get yelled at by your MD. And so this, of course, was super painful, right? So you remember that big data Borat tweet, and it felt more like I was spending 20% of my time, 80% of my time preparing data, and then another 80% of my time complaining about preparing data. And I think it was about a couple of years in when my colleague at the time, Wes McKinney, came to me and said, hey, let me show you this new library that I've been working on to make all of this a lot easier. And it was written in Python. And I used Python before, and I really loved the language. And I immediately fell in love with this library, and I started using it, evangelizing within my group at the fund, kind of got everyone in my group on it, and I started contributing to it as well. And I think about 6 months after that, Wes had gotten the fund to agree to open source that library. And so that was the origins of the Pandas library. And so for those of you who don't know the origin story here, Pandas actually, the name didn't come from the animal, but comes from panel data analysis. I don't know why those particular letters are chosen from the words, but the names just seem to have stuck. And I think once once Pandas became successful, Wes and I thought about creating a company around that, and I think we've sort of been on this journey of open source since then. Sometimes diverging paths. So he went on to create Arrow as well. I'm working on LanceDB now. So we've and I've been involved in open source for a long time. But I often caution new founders to think twice about when they say, "Hey, I want to do an open source startup." I hear kind of two pitches a lot. One is, look, I'm a technologist. I love open source, and I built one, and it got popular. I really want to do this for a living. I'm just going to build a startup to keep funding it. And typically, I think this is probably the wrong reason to want to build a startup around your open source project. I absolutely get the love for open source, but there are tons of different ways to fund your passion and fund the open source project without doing a startup. Partly because a lot of them are first time founders, and they have this rosy idea of like, hey, if I do a startup, then I get to control my own fate. I get to like only work on this project as opposed to what my boss tells me. And it's actually the opposite. Once you start a new company, you're pulled in a million directions, and you will likely spend even less time maintaining the library than you otherwise would be doing. Second strain of pitches I hear is it's somebody who already has a company, and basically their motivation is, hey, I want my startup to go viral. And I heard that open source gives me a really rapid channel for acquisition. Let me just open source something to get more eyeballs. And I think this is also the wrong motivation to open source something, because once you open source something, it brings a whole other can of worms. Like, have I given away too much value? Is this going to distract me from the commercialization? But I think mainly what I heard, I think it was Ali from Databricks that put it really succinctly, is that an open source startup is like, hey, trying to hit 2 home runs in a row. One is for your open source adoption, and one is for your commercial success. And I think that analogy is great, but I would go one step further. It's not just that you have to hit 2 home runs in a row, but the muscles you use to do each are often work counter to each other. So it's more like you have to win a gold medal in, I don't know, like Olympic weightlifting, and then immediately go win another gold medal in gymnastics, right? Activities that kind of work counter to each other a lot of times. And I think especially if you look at the last generation of open source startups, I think the popular open source projects run into these commercialization issues, even though they're huge hits in open source and see initial commercial success, right? And so I think the biggest one you probably think about is, what if insert cloud vendor just forked the project and now makes more money than you do. And this is one of the reasons around a lot of changing licenses in the field. Okay, so those are all the reasons not to do an open source startup, but I started another one. So obviously there are reasons to do so. So why did I start an open source company? And I think here today, you'll probably either you'll hear from or have already heard from some of the most successful open source companies in the world. And I think they all have a lot of these things in common. I think the biggest reason to start an open source company is sometimes your company doesn't work and can't work without open source. So we at LanceDB felt that the problem with AI data infrastructure started at the bottom, was that the data format that is most popular in the standard today, Parquet and Iceberg, is not a great fit for AI data. And specifically, I coined this term called the CAP theorem of AI data, where AI, because of the new workloads and the new data types, it needs a combination of fast scans, fast random access, and the ability to manage large blobs efficiently. And no system today exists that gives you all three, except for what we created is Lance format, and that's a table format and a file format, and it's completely free and open source. And so what that gives you is the ability to store all of your AI data in the same place, whether it's IDs and dates and text, all the way to images, videos, audio, and of course the embedding vectors themselves. And once you can hold all of your AI data in one place, you can actually index all of those AI data. So you can have full text search indices on your text columns. You can have vector indices on your embedding columns. The data access is also much more convenient. So not only is it a unified source of truth for storage, it's also a single source of truth for all the AI workloads that you want to run. So you can do data exploration queries and get either text or images out. You can load the assets into PyTorch for training, and you can run vector search or full text search for for RAG, for deduplication, for data exploration, all the things that you want to do. And so for those of you who got bored by the past couple of slides, really this is the only thing you have to remember about LanceDB. But what I want to say here is that if you think about the storage layer, the value of the data is incredibly high. The need for flexibility in terms of plugging in different workloads and different engines is pretty high up in priority. And people now really don't want their most prized assets in this closed black box. So if you're doing something in the data layer and you want to have a place where people are storing data, it just doesn't work without open source. And so today I'm super excited that Lance is becoming the new Cofounder standard for AI data, and it was only through open source that this could work. Secondly, the new generation of startups are all commercializing something adjacent or something slightly different from the core product. So examples up there, right? Hugging Face, Databricks, and new waves like Pedantic and LangChain. They're all commercializing something that is not part of the open source library. And it's kind of the same thing that we're doing with LanceDB. So when the open source is an embedded library, it's easy for experimentation, running local applications. But when you move into large scale production, you need a distributed system. That's where LanceDB, the commercial product, comes in. We give you essentially the scalability of object store, but in the performance of memory, but at a cost that's 1/10 or 1/20th other systems that don't give you object store based storage with compute and storage separation. And then beyond that, right? So it's not the table format gives you the ability to run all the workloads, but what we're building at LanceDB is an entire data lake for multimodal AI. So it's not just a vector database, but you can run SQL queries, you can run large scale distributed pre-processing, and you can train, of course, your large scale models, whether they're on text or images or video. So, I think what really excites me is today we're working with some of the most exciting multimodal companies. The ChatGPT moment in multimodal, I think, is pretty close. We're not quite there, but but we're not that far away. So imagine being able to manipulate images and videos the same way that we do with text today with that kind of ease. I think that's going to be amazing for the world and for AI. And I'm going to be super proud to say that like the Lance is going to play a big part for the data infrastructure for that when that happens, right? So the last thing I'll say is, don't start an open source startup unless it's the only way. It's the only way to win. And I'm saying this not because I don't like open source. I absolutely love open source, and I think this by being smart about doing open source startups, this is the only way um, to keep the open source business model and the ecosystem evolving and well and alive. So if you, I've included our GitHub repo to our open source. Would love any feedback. I'd love for you to check it out. All right.
Thank you so much. That was awesome and very inspiring, and I loved it. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Becca.
Of course.